I just turned recording on, FYI.
There it is. Bruce, you're the audio engineer. When it's time for us to be on the air, you point your finger and we'll start. Look, you're ready to go.
Judy and Richard.
I'm counting at least 25 pictures so far, and there's 2 people in every picture. I think this is a great attendance so far tonight, folks. I'm Dave Gensler. There are some guests I know. I'm the president this year and happy to be so. So I want to invite and welcome everybody to this meeting. Our guest, not a guest, member and presenter will be Leonard Nakamura. And someplace also is, I hope I say this right, Myra. Yes. Welcome also, Myra. I want to ask, first of all, if any of the members who are present tonight brought with them their own guests in their house or wherever else you're having the Zoom cameras tonight for you. We will get to official guests and new members in just a second. But did anybody bring onto the camera in your own house a guest tonight? I'm not seeing any hands. Yes, I see one hand go up.
Yes, Ken and I are pleased to present our guest, Mary Flournoy. Mary Flournoy, and she's from East Falls. She's co-chair of East Falls Village, and we're working hard to convince her to become a member of Science and Art.
We'll work hard with you. Thank you.
Good.
Mary, hi. Mary, would you spell your last name? Because I'm also taking notes and minutes tonight, Mary.
Yes, it's Flournoy. It's on the screen.
Yeah, I don't have a telescope on to see it right now. What I got was Flournoy, Flournoy.
That's correct. My mother used to say she would answer to anything that began with F, but that was in the 50s. You can't say that these days.
No, we're not in the 50s now.
Can we see your face, Mary?
There I am.
Hi, Mary.
Hi, Mary.
Hi.
Welcome to the group.
Thank you.
Yes, to the for the group tonight. Any other members who brought a guest along with you? Wave at me so we can tell who it is.
This is members of what organization?
There's 2 organizations.
Yeah, the organization sponsoring the meeting is the Science and Art Group. And I know that there are listeners and watchers from the Northwestern Village also tonight. I'm really proud about that. Well, let me ask Ken and Ann from the membership committee if you've got a list of new members and guests tonight. Let's do that next.
No. We have a
All
list
right.
of new members. And I was hoping to be able to introduce George McNeely, who is a very recent new member. He gave us a really interesting talk in April last year.
Yes.
About climate change and its effect on historic landmarks around the world. It was a very interesting talk. So, but I don't see him here. Yeah.
No, not on the screen tonight. I remember his talk very well. In fact, I've got the habit of writing acknowledgements notes to the presenters after the evening meeting. Okay.
But many of the people here and perhaps most of the people whose names we at Science and Art may not, and faces may not recognize, are, I believe, members of Northwest Village Network. So maybe they would raise their hands and wave or in some way identify themselves.
That's a great idea, and thanks a lot. Yes, I see lots of hand waving now, and the membership will wave back at you. How's that? Okay, all right.
Welcome.
Yes, most welcome to everybody. I want to pass this off now to our topic and event of the evening. Leonard, welcome. You are, and also Myra, are members of the Science and Art Club to begin with. So you are your own host and guest tonight, but I want to welcome you especially. And thank you once again for the short chat that you and I had much earlier today, Leonard.
Sure.
And I did get things straightened out electronically with my my machine as well. But Leonard, why don't you introduce yourself? Some of us, not all, have read the article that you wrote, and it'll be very interesting to listen to you and to present something about economics for the 21st century. Please, Leonard.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for inviting me to give this talk, and thanks everybody for coming. This is a great audience. And I think I'll start by sharing my screen. Let's see if I can do this correctly. How's that? Is that look okay to everybody?
Very good. Yes.
Okay. So, so I'm an economist, and I've been an economist for 40, 50 years. And for the last 25 years, I've been working on studying innovation. So a lot of this is about my research, but some of it is very new material that I will be presenting for the first time. So I'm going to try and leave a lot of time for chat, question and answers afterwards, to see, you know, what made sense to you and what didn't, and what you agreed with and whatnot. I am an emeritus economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, which means I still have an office there. And so I have to say that these are my views and not those of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia or the Federal Reserve System. The US economy has shifted away from industrial production, which was the main focus of the economy from 1880 to 1980, towards innovation. Innovation has risen for the last 4 decades, from 1980 to 2020. US corporations now spend $2 trillion a year on innovation. The US GDP is $20 trillion, roughly. So 1/10 of all US economic activity is devoted to creating new products. The outcome has been the rapid advances in technology that we see all around us. Unfortunately, this innovation is way over rewarded, and these extreme rewards are driving income and wealth inequality. So from 1980 to 2020, the 1% share of the economy doubled as they benefited from the high returns to innovation. So because the returns to innovation are so strong, successful innovators wind up in the top 1%, and their income has been rising. So every year, the 1% has more and more savings that it must stash somewhere. They've got more and more income and they can't spend it all. So they have to find something to invest in. But the supply of profitable investments isn't growing fast enough to keep up with the rise of inequality. So the rich wind up basically wasting a lot of their money. So the rich, among other things, bid up the price of all possible investments. As a result, we wind up with asset bubbles in all kinds of things. So there've been recently very rapid increases in land prices and stock prices. There's now $2 trillion in cryptocurrency. There's even a land rush in the metaverse. And the interesting thing about it is that there's really no need for these strong incentives for innovation, because for two reasons. First of all, there's too much innovation. Plus, innovators don't really need strong incentives, but I'll get to that later. So reducing returns to innovators would be a good thing for the economy and for all of us. It would make the economy work better, and it would reduce inequality. And that's basically what I'm going to be talking about tonight. There are so many things that we ought to be doing that are critically important, but we're not doing because there aren't profit motives to do these things. So we should be doing a whole lot for climate change amelioration and to prepare for the consequences for climate change, but we aren't doing a tenth or even 100th as much as we need to be doing. We need to make education affordable. We need to make healthcare affordable. We need to make housing affordable, but we're not doing those things. Instead, we're allowing the rich to waste their money, which is wasting our economy's resources. So, how has the economy changed? Well, if you think about the 20th century from 1880 to 1980, it was dominated by huge industrial powers like General Motors, General Electric, DuPont, IBM, Exxon, and on and on. But now think about Apple. Apple is one of the new corporate powers, but it doesn't make stuff. It doesn't make the iPhone. Instead, what it does is it designs the microprocessor and all the rest, you know, the cameras and whatnot, and then oversees the iPhone's production by other firms. What Apple owns is not factories, but brands, copyrights, and patents that give it the monopoly to sell and profit off the iPhone. This is investment in what we call intellectual property. Now, one thing about intellectual property is that it's intangible. It's not like a factory. So a factory is located somewhere geographically, but intellectual property can stick anywhere. So Apple can pretend that its intellectual property is in Ireland. So the Ireland unit of Apple collects most of the Apple's revenue, which is very beneficial for tax purposes for Apple. So anyway, this is what America does. It innovates new products, and that's very different from industrial production. Who does the actual production doesn't matter very much. And there are all these other big innovations, Google search and maps, Tesla electric cars, SpaceX rockets, Moderna, Pfizer vaccines, Amazon Prime e-commerce, Nike Air Jordans. All of these companies, Nike, Amazon, Moderna, SpaceX, Tesla, Google, they get global monopoly rights through patents, copyrights, and brands, and make billions of dollars from that. They're just huge rewards to innovation. So think of the big six: Apple, Google, Microsoft, Tesla, Amazon, Facebook. Their market value rose from $700 billion in 2007 to $10 trillion today. That's a sixth the value of all US corporations. So over that same period, the value of US corporations rose from $21 trillion to $63 trillion. So, the big six were, something like 3 or 4% of corporate value in 2007, and now they're over 15%. But just in the last 2 years, there's been a tremendous boost to the market value of all these stocks, and stocks total corporate value went up from 42 trillion to 63 trillion, a 50% increase in just the last 2 years. And by the way, if you follow the stock market, you know that the stock market has been falling recently. Well, the 63 trillion is after that fall. So there's, even with this recent fall, there's just been a tremendous increase in stock prices. So how much is $1 billion? We've been talking trillions, but I just want you to give you an idea of how big $1 billion is. Now, think for a moment about spending $10,000 a day. Could you and your family do that? You probably could if you worked hard at it. If you spent that much and you started with $1 million, that $1 million would disappear in 4 months. But if you started with $1 billion, it would last more than 250 years. So think about that. $1 billion is far more than any family can spend. So most of it has to be saved. $1 billion would pay a year's full tuition for the entire Ivy League class of 2025. I mean, just think of the thousands and thousands of parents whose children have children have recently entered the Ivy League, right? They're looking at huge bills to pay the tuition, but $1 billion would pay the tuition for all of them. Another way to look at this is that Elon Musk had $200 million, which he made from selling his part of PayPal. And he used that to start Tesla and SpaceX, right? Well, Tesla revolutionized cars. SpaceX has revolutionized space exploration. Those were really amazing investments. But that just took $200 million. Now he's got $200 billion. Is he going to find 1,000 more pairs of great investments? I don't think so. He's got way more money than he needs. So why did innovation accelerate around 1980? Well, there were valuable technological reasons, particularly microprocessors and software, right? So personal computers really started taking off around 1980. It wasn't until 1984 that we got the, the Macintosh and easy to use computers, but the software really started to explode, and PCs just became enormously valuable. And one consequence of that was that science got lots of great technology. And in addition to that, policies were put in place starting around 1980 to accelerate innovation, including lower taxes, lower tariffs, which created bigger global markets, and more monopoly power from stronger and longer patents and copyrights, plus regulation was reduced. So, the 1% in 1980, they earned 10% of all our incomes. That was a lot, right? But in 2020, they earned 20% of all incomes. That adds up to about $3 trillion every year. It's $1.5 trillion more than they would have gotten if their cut had stayed at 10%. As a result, they now have $2 trillion that they can't spend and have to stash somewhere. So what do? Well, they have to invest it. And what happens is you wind up having too much saving, chasing too few ideas. Just as Elon Musk doesn't have 1,000 new great ideas, the rich just have way too much money and too few ways to spend it. So what do? For example, the rich buy up land, which then the middle class can no longer afford. And then they invest in stupid things like Bitcoin, collectibles, and the metaverse. And as the super rich bid up the price of bonds, interest rates fall and we get really low interest rates. So what's happening? Well, as I said, stock market value was up 50% between 2020 and 2022. In 2020, Mackenzie Scott, Bezos's ex, gave away $6 billion and it ended up the year richer. Right? It's ridiculous the amount of money that the rich have. Home prices went up 20% in 2021. At the peak of the last housing boom in 2006, the home prices were rising at about a 15% rate. So home prices are now rising faster than they did back then. Bitcoin was $1,000 each in 2017 and is now $30,000. And that's after having fallen 50% because it was up to 60,000 not too long ago. Property in virtual lands in the metaverse that sold for $20 in 2018 sold in 2021 for $100,000. This is ridiculous. real interest rates, that is, interest rates after we subtract out the rate of inflation, which tells you, how much the dollars you're going to get if you lend money, or what we see is that, the real interest rate that the US government paid used to be around 3%. Now it's fallen to about 0.2%. And actually, it's somewhat below zero right now. So those lower interest rates themselves push up higher asset prices. So just think about this, right? As mortgage rates fall, as they do as interest rates come down, a given house price is easier to finance. Home bidders can afford to bid more, so the price of housing goes up. And then on top of that, the rich buy up more and more homes to rent out, displacing the middle class. Also, if a bond earns such low rates, then almost any other asset starts to look much better. So people go out and buy all kinds of assets whose value goes up and up. This is turning virtually every asset market into a bubble. More and more people believe that housing prices will always go up in the long run, that stock prices will always go up in the long run. Crypto will always go up in the long run. Collectibles and NFTs will always go up in the long run. So what people do is they buy and then hold on for dear life. They become hodlers, right? And that's not anything to do with thinking about what good these investments are doing. Anyway, that creates bubbles, because if assets don't create real value, then they can't really wind up being worth more. Can we bring these back to earth without a crash? It's true that higher prices of land, houses, stocks, and crypto make some people feel wealthier, but they do nothing for our real problems. In fact, they harm us. For example, high house prices don't result in the construction of affordable housing. They make it harder. Higher prices of land don't do anything for the environment. They make planting trees more expensive. Bitcoin is used as a currency mainly by criminals. So, if you do something that makes somebody computers freeze, you get your pay in Bitcoin. And we really don't need huge rewards for innovation, right? I mean, the thing is that innovation is creativity. People love to do it. They don't need a small chance of winning $1 billion. They just need stable earnings. They need to make a living. People love to be creative. They say, follow your passion and you'll never work a day in your life. Well, people who are innovative are really love what they're doing. But in particular,
Leonard, I think we lost the audio on you.
Yeah, I think, can everyone else hear us?
We can't hear Leonard.
Yeah, it must be Leonard.
Frozen. My view of Leonard is that
He's frozen.
Oh,
he's
he's off.
frozen, yeah.
Leonard, can you hear us?
Yeah, I didn't know what happened just then.
All right, you're gonna,
But you visually froze and you muted.
Okay, the last thing we heard was innovators never work a day in their life. Pick up from there.
Yeah.
I think you left off telling us how to make the 10 billion per year.
Stop, Steve.
I missed that part.
Okay. My internet connection has gone unstable on me.
It's back though. We can hear you and we can see you.
Okay. So social and ethical problems are caused by the fact that innovation is so fast. We can't keep up with fast change and the fast advances of science. Our skills and ideas get outmoded rapidly. You know, we all complain about social media, but two-way mass communication is very powerful and it's very new. You know, it's threatening our privacy, it's undermining democracy. We don't know how to deal with it. Genome manipulation has become very cheap, very easy. Should we do it? Robots, self-driving cars, drones, who is responsible, right? If a self-driving car causes somebody to die, who pays the penalty, right? We don't have very good ways of penalizing corporations. Space commercial exploitation, you know, the United States, China, India, Japan, they're all racing into space, but we don't have any legal structure or any strong treaty structure for how to go about divvying up space and space. Think about brain-machine interfaces. You know, increasingly we're able to attach machines to our brains. But is that going to change what it means to be a human being? What are the responsibilities of something that can pipe into your brain? All these things, all these innovations could be great, but they're coming at us too fast for us to digest them. Sorry. Sorry about that. Education. If you don't have a college degree, you can't earn a good living. Innovative corporations hire mainly college grads, and those innovative corporations are sucking up all the money in the economy, right? Healthcare. Innovation in healthcare increases the cost of healthcare faster than incomes rise. What that means is that now most Americans can't afford decent health insurance. We desperately need single-payer healthcare, but without single-payer healthcare, we can't afford medical innovation. Okay, I've been talking a long time. You know, I basically say innovation breeds inequality and too fast change. Inequality is making the US economy unworkable. Wealth is going to bubbles, not what we need. Taxation and regulation are needed to reverse these train wrecks. Innovation needs to be redirected towards social benefits. Now, I have a whole section where I get on a soapbox, but and talk about how actually with the Biden administration, we're trying to do a lot of this stuff. But let's stop here and catch our breaths and have a conversation. So
No, now you are.
Leonard,
It's like climate change. I don't know how to fix it.
And your
climate change?
individual.
No, I'm being a little facetious, but
Right.
it's really hard to,
and your
it's
screen
really hard to imagine how to fix
lights up when you talk.
the disproportionate wealth that you talked about,
Where are we?
because the
We talk, it lights up.
Yes.
It's,
go ahead.
well, you know, I could get into the steps that we are starting to take and that we should be taking. But, you know, to begin with, we need to tax more. And we need to tax more, not just as a preference for taxes or as a preference for big government, but to save our economy. The way our economy works right now, you know, it's just, the economy is going crazy.
Well, I have voiced this in some of the meetings that we've had, Leonard and Judy and others here, Merle. I think that one of the problems has to do with the competition that exists among leadership to acquire more and acquire more and acquire more and gain power and gain power and gain power. And my personal opinion is that that would be sizably ameliorated if we had women running the show rather than men. Women tend to be collaborative. Women tend to be less I don't know, competitive and fervent in their efforts to win. Women tend to be more conscious of the needs of other people besides themselves. And I personally would be a lot happier if the president of the United States was a female, along with the rest of the cabinet. You know, so I expect to be in trouble with all the guys here, but you know, what the heck?
I think a lot of people,
You can't get to me.
I think a lot of people would disagree. If you look at, say, our current vice president, I don't think she qualifies, fits into any of your
Well, I think that there are
females are this or that category. So I don't think she.
I think
That doesn't
individuals
include
would be
Sarah
an
Ellen, does it?
Pardon me? I think individuals would be an exception, but I think that the predominant influence that women in general would have would be more creative, more cooperative, more engaging, more embracing than what men do. I mean, men are used to going out and fighting, and women are used to staying home and taking care of the kids, and I prefer to be taken care of.
So what is the likelihood that the changes that you feel need to happen, or that the Federal Reserve feels need to happen, that those can be made active in this political climate?
I think it's going to take a couple of 100 years for it to happen. I don't think we have the time to do it now in our lifespans, but we can start in that direction.
I do have a comment and a question.
Tim, I would like the chance to respond to some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, these are not the Federal Reserve's views. let's be quite clear about that. I
Mostly
said that
men.
at the beginning. The but in fact, we're a lot of what I'm proposing is the direction of a lot of Biden and Democratic policies. Now, you know, the very short run doesn't look that great, but you know, but for example, right now the G20 countries have initialed a tax treaty for the entire globe that makes it much harder for corporations like Apple to dodge taxes. And you know, so there's you know, this period of, you know, the sudden dominance of these tech powers has been relatively very recent. And
Yeah.
you know, governments have not had time to react. The other thing is that regulation needs to happen, and there's now bipartisan legislation in Congress that wants to prevent tech companies from overly favoring large businesses against smaller ones.
Well, I wouldn't know the techniques that would be used to implement a more
I think it's
collaborative.
important for, this is becoming a two-way conversation. I think we need to let other people speak.
I would like to comment. I know that there have been studies, and I totally agree with what you're saying, Tim, about the role of women in general, but the studies have shown that women in corporate leadership behave no differently than the men in corporate leadership. And that's unfortunate because our expectations are very different, but they tend to conform to what the corporate world expects of leaders. So that's in the long run, it doesn't seem to make a difference whether it's a man or a woman in those positions. I do have a question though, and that is based on the altruism of some of our mega wealthy people, such as Bill and Melinda Gates. Are there others who can follow their lead in terms of turning their wealth toward undoing the inequality in the world, or is it just based on the altruism of these individuals? Because taxing the wealthy is going to be extremely difficult, at least in our current government. And I'm not saying Democrats versus Republicans. I'm saying in general, whether Democrats are in control or Republicans, it's still very, very difficult.
That's driving it.
For you, Leonard.
Well, I think that, I mean, this is not going to be easy. You know, I think that's exactly right. But I think as people come to understand how awful this degree of inequality is for us, then, and, you know, there are important movements in politics that are pushing in this direction. So, I mean, one of the things that has been a big change that for many years, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates and stopped expansions whenever inflation whenever the economy got started to inflate. And what they have now realized is that what that does is by slowing down the economy precisely when workers are starting to have more rights, more bargaining power vis-a-vis corporations, they made corporations strong and weakened earning power, right? And now economists are building models that show that. And a number of people in the Federal Reserve, have said, let's not put on the brakes so fast. So we've allowed inflation to get much higher than it's been in the past. And because we're relatively confident that inflation is going to come down on its own. Now, we do have to raise interest rates in the short run, but that's because interest rates have been, short-term interest rates have been ridiculously low for a long time. Barbara? You're muted, Barbara.
My understanding is that inflation is a worldwide problem. So the effect of the Federal Reserve, it would actually have a global effect. If inflation was to come down, it would not just be here, because there are many causes of inflation right now.
Right.
And some of the things that happened to cause inflation were not bad. Things done in response to the pandemic. But getting back to somebody's comment about very rich people wanting to be generous and altruistic, we shouldn't have to rely on the generosity of Bill and Melinda Gates creating a huge foundation where they choose how to spend their money to do good works. Ultra rich people should be taxed. Rich people should be taxed more, but the very rich should be taxed at a whole other level. And Elizabeth Warren proposed a wealthy people tax. And most people are on board with it. Maybe not people, elected officials, but most people support that, be they Republican or Democrat. People who have, many millions of dollars or who earn, $10 million a year. People should be paying more taxes than us, not less. So I don't think we should have to rely on people being generous. They should just pay their share. And this economy allowed them to get so rich. It's a little bit of payback.
Yeah. And the other thing is that, we have also allowed monopolists to get even stronger monopolists because we allow them to buy up their competitors. And that means that we get more stronger and bigger monopolies that more and more dominate the economy and can charge whatever they want.
Yeah, the taxation rates after the Second World War were in the range, for the wealthy, were in the range of 90–95%. That was pretty darn high, and that would be appropriate for now. They had a graduated tax rate that took it up to the 90s, and the structure of that tax rate declined incrementally until you got down to the average person.
I know. Where is
Raise your hand.
Excuse me just for a minute. This is Ken Kaloje, and I just wanted to remind everybody that we are the Science and Art Club. We don't discuss politics or religion. And I'm just going to say it out loud, and then we can get back to the economics of this talk. If we can, just We just sort of ease off from time to time, and it's easy
We're
to,
not meeting now.
but if we could, well, that would be appreciated. And also, if you would ask a question of Leonard and then, let him answer, and then let other people ask questions at that point, it would be a big help. Thank you.
Leonard, could you talk about why it's so hard to tax the rich?
Well, there are two reasons why it's hard to tax the rich. First of all, because the rich have great resources to manipulate the law. So they can give money to politicians and influence politicians. They have tax lawyers who can figure out all kinds of clever strategies, on and on and on. And the other thing is that their wealth taxes are not that easy to design, but it is possible to design wealth taxes that more or less work, and particularly in a framework which we're trying to set up these days, where wealth is not unaccountable all across the world.
Thank you.
Leonard?
I want to be called on.
Mr. Torday, please.
No, it's Dr. Torday, but yeah, okay. So I see the problem, Leonard, as a scientist in the patent process, because as you know, the stricture on patenting is the unobviousness test, right? And so that's why we can't deal with the innovation. And the government has exacerbated that with the Dole-By Act, allowing for academicians to patent, right? So we are responsible for this, and I think that my opinion is that in the patenting process, that there should be a stricture on that in terms of the impact of any given innovation on society. That doesn't exist in the patenting process. So, do you have a question?
Right. So many things could be done to improve the patenting process, and one of the things that happen is that a special patent court was established, and that patent court had a strong interest in expanding its own power and making patents more powerful and giving patents that were quite obvious. So, for example, Amazon got a patent for one-click shopping, right? I mean, give me a break. One-click shopping. That's not non-obvious. Anyway, the patent process is a big problem, and we've extended patent lengths, we've extended copyright lengths, we extend copyright to software, which doesn't make any sense, it used to be that mathematical processes could not be patented. And now all you have to do is attach them to a machine and you're allowed to patent them. And again, that's ridiculous. But all these things could be rolled back if we have a national discussion about these issues.
Leonard, it's Dave. I want to take us back to your initial distinction between the industrial age and now the information age, and specifically attached to your expertise by way of the Federal Reserve System. During the industrial age, up to about 1980, I think you said, the Federal Reserve had its hands on and its decisions based on inventions and improvements of things we could see as far as machinery and processes go. You said that we've entered the new age of information, things we can't see, things we can't control outright. I guess I want to ask you, connected to your expertise in the reserve system, folks, how has that field so changed that you need to think of new ideas in the Federal Reserve System to watch the economic system go up and down?
Yeah, there have been a lot of changes in how we think about the economy. There's been a much greater concern about, for example, financial crises, and a much greater concern with how measurement takes place, and and what it means to operate in a global economy. These are all very complicated, and by and large, the Federal Reserve has been trying to change, but it's slow, and how it behaves has to be communicated to the around the globe and throughout the economy, and so these things take place slowly. But it has been researchers within the Federal Reserve who pushed forward the idea of how much the center of the economy was changing.
Leonard, yeah, so what are some of the measures that our nation's reserve board are taking to be in communication with other boards like it around the globe? I guess I'm wondering if that's part of your conversation.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I give talks all around the world. I'm giving a talk in a couple of days virtually in Slovenia. Back in November, I went to England, and so, and economists and others throughout the Federal Reserve System are in constant communication with people in the government, with corporations, with their counterparts in other countries. And we write papers, and we make presentations, and there's a lot of communication that takes place. I'll be going to at least 2 conferences this summer where I'll be talking about these things.
Leonard, I appreciate your talk. It's very, very, very interesting. But one thing that bothers me a little bit about it is that innovation has been the lifeblood of America many years before 1980. And you had a period of time much earlier in our history where you had the same forces operating. You had the extremely wealthy industrialists, Rockefeller, Ford, and the same ideas happening. So this is not a new phenomenon in America. The idea of innovation with the factory, the automobile factory, and the shift from the industrial age to the industrial age was a similar time period. And maybe we can learn lessons from how things happened at that time, the antitrust legislation, the taxing of the wealthy, and so on. Maybe there are things that were done then that we should go back to, the unions and so on. But I hate to think of the idea that 1980 was somehow a huge break from our historical innovative past. It's just a different kind of innovation, and a different set of people who are wealthy, but it isn't something new in American history.
Okay, so it's true, but what you're saying, except that so from 1880 to 1920, there was an incredible burst of innovation, and and in particular from 1895 to 1915, when mass production of huge things like huge factories like car factories came into existence. But then and then we got into trouble with we had the Roaring '20s, and then starting in the '30s, we started to have a much more regulated economy as a result of the progressive movement and the New Deal, and innovation slowed down, right? From 1950 to 1980, innovation was dominated by big companies, General Motors, General Electric, and so on. Most of those big corporations had existed for 100 years, right? I mean, General Motors was started in 1915, Ford Motor was started around 1910, General Electric was started in around 1910. Those big corporations lasted 70, 90, 100 years, but they all began falling apart in the 70s and 80s under the onslaught of new technology. So from 1950 to 1980, if you look at the statistics, the most R&D was being done by the hugest corporations. And those huge corporations did small incremental changes, but they didn't do huge changes, right? But what they were able to do is that if somebody came along with a huge change, they would sick their lawyers on them and, get rid of their patent rights. And so, for example, IBM was able to stop, the UNIVAC, which had the first real computer, from having any patent rights by suing them. And but beginning around 1980, it became harder and harder for those big corporations to keep up with nimbler, smaller corporations. And as a result, the most research-intensive corporations stopped being the very biggest ones and started being the very smallest ones, right? And now we've allowed, the really big corporations to become just like the old industrial corporations, because we haven't, and, your comment, Elliot, was spot on here. We're not applying antitrust laws to these guys the way, we did in the 1920s and 30s. So yeah, we do need to remember what what we used to have, and in the 1950s and 60s, when we had very high taxes, that was a time of great inequality and also of relative stability compared to what we have now. And these are the lessons that I plan to put into this book a friend of mine and I are writing. And a big section of that is going to be a history that goes back to 1880. So great comment, Elliot.
Can you give us one example of a smaller product that has made it in spite of all these factors? and why, in your opinion, why did this one make it? Or maybe there is no such thing.
Well, there are a lot of small products. I mean, all these things like Google and Facebook and Apple and Microsoft, they started out from small products, right? All these companies didn't get started in 1915 or 1920. They started in, the 1970s or the 1980s or the 1990s, and they started small, right? But they've been allowed to not only grow their main products, but they've been allowed to buy up other products to an extent that makes them monopolists and over more and more of the economy. Did that answer your question, Barbara?
Yeah, I should have said a small company that stayed small, but there may be no such thing. I don't know.
There are a gazillion companies that start small and stay fairly small, like, mom and pop stores.
Oh, yeah.
But a lot of those mom and pop stores are now selling their wares through Etsy or through Amazon. And, half of what Amazon sells are being, coming from other corporations. So there are opportunities out there, but for example, Amazon, if it sees some seller being really successful, it will go after their market, and which they shouldn't be allowed to do, right? That's a monopoly practice. The Biden administration has a bunch of top antitrust lawyers who are very aware of these practices. And so there's this law which may well become law that forbids corporations like Amazon from discriminating against small businesses.
Leonard, we have a question in the chat box, and maybe this will sort of wind down our evening, for which we're very grateful. The question is, should estates be taxed more heavily so philanthropy will be encouraged by the 1%?
Yeah, I think estates should be taxed more, and the means that the rich have for escaping estate taxes by setting up trusts, those loopholes need to be closed.
Len, a question for you. It's Joel Levinson. The question has to do with government for sale, the influence of money into how government operates. Do you think it's any greater today than it has been in the past? It just seems as though people with money just can buy and corrupt the proper functioning of government.
Well, to a certain extent, I mean, I think government corruption has been a problem forever. And I think that the voters really have a lot of say. And I guess, my reading is that there are just a lot of people who are unhappy with the existing system. They just can't agree about what's the right way to go. So we'll have to see how this turns out. But people are looking to radical solutions. And I'm not a big fan of radical solutions. I'm not a big fan of either big government or big corporations. But we do have very big problems, and either we'll work them through democratically, or we're going to be in big trouble. Let me say one last thing, which is that I think civilization is not easy. We all imagine that civilization is easy. It's very hard. It's very hard to get along with other people. And so, we need all our brains and all our empathy if we're going to get through this. We need to talk with one another, and we need to think things through, and we need to empathize with one another. So anyway, that's my soapbox.
Leonard, hi, it's David. Yes, your talk presentation stimulated and spurred on lots of discussion and questions tonight, for which I want to thank you. And I want to pass along the thanks of the entire group, not just of Science and Art, but also special guests tonight from the Northwest neighborhood. Thank you for being not just a member of the Science and Art membership, but also our special guest tonight with your presentation. I want to ask Ken and Anne if you've got anything we need to add in preparation for our next time on Science and Art, which would be a month from now, February.
Did you say 10